Hi guys, so today I'm doing a book review video. It's my first book review video of the new year. So, happy 2025. I have like a piece of hair somewhere on my lips. Anyway, it felt weird doing a book review video for this month because usually I just read like a I usually just read like the Outlander series, but I finished that last year. So now I have 6 books instead of just 1 or 2 that I usually do for January. And let me say, this month the books were like a mixture. Like some were okay, some were boring, some were most basically they were in the middle. So let me get started with this book. Now this book was from 2019 and it was a series. I didn't know that when I got this book. It's got, I think it was 6 or 7 short stories in it. And it's called Broken Throne. It's a Red Queen collection. And it's by Victoria Aveyard. I guess that's how you say her last name. That's what it looks like. It's a big book. And like I said, this year, like last year, I usually have like a goal of like, a couple years ago, it was put one biography in each book review video I do because I had so many biographies. And now I have so many, like, big books. So I'm like, well, that's my thing. So last year and this year, it's still the same because I still have a lot of big books to read. And this was the big book. It had 468 pages. That's not including the acknowledgments in the back. Now this book, it's been a long time, I'll say this, since I read a book like this. It's like a fantasy type of book-ish. It's where it kind of reminded me of the War of the Roses, between like the red and I think it was the white rose or something like that, which was like the Yorks and I forget what the Lancasters, that kind of thing, kind of reminded me of that, where it was between the reds and the silvers. This whole, what I can get out of it, this whole series is about the reds and the silvers, and the reds and the silvers don't get along. And then there's kingdoms where they do get along, and they made kids who they call new bloods. And I think the silvers have silver blood, but they also, I think, have powers or something like that, some kind of powers. This book, it was okay. I will say, the one thing I hate beyond anything is when, and I know that this is a series, so if I was into this stuff, like I said, I haven't read like a fantasy type of book in a very long time. Maybe I would have read the series and I would have liked it and I would know what was going on in this book. It was just okay. Like I said, the short stories in this book I didn't really like, because the one thing I hate about when an author does short stories is when the short stories do not have an ending and they just leave them open-ended. And I get it. Maybe the next book in the series had like the connecting pieces to these stories, but it was just okay. Like I said, like the stories were about different, you had to keep in mind that some of the characters came back in the different stories, so you had to remember who was from what kingdom, did they abdicate for that kingdom to do whatever, and blah 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 blah. It was an okay book. Like I said, I haven't read a fantasy book like this in a long time, and it's probably like a young adult fantasy, I guess. It doesn't say anywhere on here like what kind of book it is. It just says Harper Teen on it, so I guess it's a young adult book. In between some of the stories, there was purple pages that explain like kind of like the history of what's going on, the kingdoms. There's like flags in the book, like towards the end. The one thing I will say is like the last set of purple pages, the second to last set, they did a timeline of what was going on at the time. And then they stopped the timeline and then they went into more detail about that timeline. And I'm like, what was the point of putting the timeline in the book? But other than that, it was an okay book. Like I said, there was parts in it where I'm just like, should I stop reading it? Especially, like I said, like the second story in the book, second short story in the book did not have like a conclusion to it at all, even reading the rest of the stories. But I powered through it. I read it. Like I said, it was just an okay book. So this book was pretty interesting. It takes place during World War II. And this is called An Unmarked Grave. It's by Charles Todd. It's a Bess Crawford mystery. Now, this book, I will say, there's another book here that I'm going to go into more detail about. But usually with mysteries, I always say, if it's more than 200 pages, like, there's probably 100 pages in that story where you could just get rid of whatever was going on in it. Now, this one makes sense. Oh, this is what it looks like. This one makes sense why it was like 262 pages, but and the chapters, I will say, there were some that were short, and then most of the chapters were maybe like 20 some pages long. But it's because it took place like in a historical setting, like during World War II. It's about this woman, Bess Crawford. She's a nun, but she's also a nurse, and it's taking place, I think it was like 1918, where the war's still going on. She's English, and she's working in France, and it's when the Spanish influenza was going on. And what happened is somehow she goes to this shed, I think it was, where they keep their dead, and they separate them based on if they died from the flu or if they died from like a war injury. And there was this man there who, he wasn't sick, and it wasn't from a war injury. His neck was broken, and she knew that somebody killed him or unalived him, or whatever you have to say on YouTube now. And she had to figure out who did it and why. And I will say, though, the one thing in this book is you have to keep the characters straight, especially the male characters, because her dad is a colonel, and sometimes she calls him the colonel instead of her dad. And then there's a man in the book who lives, I don't know what he does, but he does something with her parents' estate, but he lives in his own separate little cottage or something on the estate. Like, I don't know what he does. I don't know if he does like wartime errands or something like that. I forget. So you have to keep that in mind too. And of course, the couple other male characters that tag along with her in this book. I will say it did have a surprise ending in the back, and why the man did what he did, the person that did the murder to this man, is over the most stupidest reason. But then again, like, his mind wasn't in the right place because of what was going on during the war at that time. So that was a pretty good book. Now, this book, I didn't know it, had 3 stories in it. And it's called Amish Midwives. It's by Amy Clipston, Shelley, Shepard Gray, and Kelly Long. This is what it looks like. Now, one of these stories didn't really have like a wrap-up in it, and I forget which one it was. It might have been the last one. I don't remember. But anyway, it's about these Amish women who become midwives, or are midwives, and along the way, it's basically like they're finding love. That's basically what this book is. And the last one is about, a woman who, I think she lost her husband, and she realizes that her ex, her like high school sweetheart, if you want to call it that, is back in town. and she doesn't want to go with him because of what happened the last time they were together, and he doesn't want to be with her because of what happened, and she picked his best friend to be married to instead of him. The second one was about a woman who had this secret of why she was a midwife, and she didn't want to be a midwife anymore because of what happened at one of her births. And her friend wants her to be her midwife, and her brother does too. And so she does, but she's still kind of apprehensive about it. And then the third one is a Christmas story where it's about this woman and her driver, and she's taking over the business from her aunt, I think, for like a couple days because she's took a vacation to Florida or something. And it's her and this man who took over his dad's spot driving, not driving, like, well, driving, like, you know, like the horse and buggy kind of thing for her. So his son's doing it because he's sick. And it's basically on Christmas Eve slash Christmas, where these three women all are having their babies around like the same type of time. It's like she gets done with one and she's like, oh, I have to go check up on this one, and then that one's having a baby and stuff like that. And they were really cute stories, I will say. They were short. Like, I don't think any of them were over 10 pages, 10 chapters long, and then there's like an epilogue and maybe a prologue, but that's basically it. Now this book I'm going to show you is the book that I should have DNF'd. I shouldn't have finished it. It's called The Cameo Clue. Now, I never read a mystery in this series before. It's called A Kathleen Kael Mystery. It's by Dorothy Bodain. This is what it looks like. It's about this woman who, I think she moved into this house or something like that. And she finds this cameo in the ground because she's gardening. And this cameo, a cameo is kind of like a pin that has like a face on it. It looks like this, like that. I think like in the 1900s, people used to wear them, maybe in the 1800s. And she's trying to figure out what this pin has to do with this murder that happened in the small town that she lives in. It happened where in this apple festival thing where this older woman ate this caramel apple and then it was poisoned, and you know the rest. And she figures out that this cameo belongs to this older woman and these two other women who used to live, these three women that used to live in the house that she lives in now. And it was a weird kind of story, and it was 300 pages. And let me tell you, the story did not have to be 300 pages. The one thing I say that is annoying is that every time they introduced a new character, she had to explain everything about this cameo, how she found it, where it was found, why it was broken. Like, it was because the character would bring it up, like, oh, why is this cameo broken, and blah, blah, blah. She had to go into detail about it every single time. And then every time, you know, the writer was getting tired of it because every single time, like after a couple, it was a shortened version. Or the last time that she brought it up to somebody, it was basically just said, Kathleen just told blah, blah, blah about, you know, whatever. She didn't really like go into like the dialogue stuff. And it was a weird story, I will say, like about who did it and why, that kind of thing. I don't know. It was just okay. Like I said, I really didn't like this mystery. I don't think I have any more in this series. I'm not really sure. But I loved how when I read the next story that I read, I was like, oh, like I want to read a mystery book. I didn't read a mystery book in a while because I read all those Christmas books. And I was like, oh, I'll read that. And it wasn't a great mystery book. Now, this book is a series. I'm not going to read the other two in the series This is called The Fine Print. It's by Lauren Asher. It's called The Dreamland Billionaires. This is what it looks like. And basically, it's about this family who owns this amusement park. Basically, it's like a 1-for-1 almost of Disneyland, basically. And it's about, basically the series is about these 3 brothers. And their grandfather used to run the park. And the grandfather has these 3 things. Well, each one in his will has to do these things in order to become like a part of the company or take over the company so their dad wouldn't get it. Because their dad was, according to them, was like heartless and didn't care like after their mom died and whatever. He just gave up on life. And it's about the first one. I think it's about the younger son. And his name is Rowan. And the girl's name is Zara. And it's basically, he has a year. And he has to come up with a way, something new for the park. And so Zara, she worked in the castle doing like those makeovers for kids and stuff where they can turn into a princess or whatever. And she sees, I don't know, she submits work. She submits something to him to improve the park, or an idea of like this ride experience. And then he picks her to move up to be one of those like Disney engineer people, that kind of thing. And throughout the series, they form a relationship. And the chapters aren't that long in this book. I don't know how many chapters are because it just goes between one of the main characters' point of views. But it was okay. Like, it wasn't like, it didn't amaze me. Like I said, like, it didn't make me want to like go and buy the other 2 in this set. I mean, if I wanted to, I don't know where I would get them from because I don't think they have them anymore, like in Walmart, or at least mine. But other than that, like, it was an okay book. Like I said, it was like 1-for-1 with kind of like Disneyland and that kind of thing. And then at the end, something happens where there's like a twist. Because what he has to show this board of people is his idea at the end of the book, and they have to vote on it. And the people that were picked for it, there was some pretty good twists in it, let me just say. Now, last but not least is this book. Now, this book was just weird. It's called Politically Correct Bedtime Stories, Modern Tales for Our Life and Times. It's by James Finn Gardner. This book, it was a short little book. Like I said before, you know, when like you have a book that you really want to read, and then you read it and you're just like, why did I want to read this? Now, basically, it's taking like little stories, you know, like the classic stories that we all know, like the 3 Little Pigs, Rumpelstiltskin, I think Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, Little Red Riding Hood, that kind of thing. And they're putting like a more correct version, redoing the storyline, but in a more correct way. It was really weird. I don't know how I could say it. Like, I mean, and the stories were short in the book. Like, this only took me like a day to read. It was just okay, like I said. Like I said, obviously they're really weird compared to like what any person grew up with reading like those classic little fairy tales. But I wouldn't read these to kids because I don't think the kids would understand it. I think this book was more leaning towards the adult kids that grew up with the original version of these stories. But other than that, that was my book review video. I'll see you guys next time. I'm hoping to put some romance stories in my next book review video because it will be Valentine's Day and it will be February. So see you guys next time with another book review video, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.